Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever the fuck you're watching this. This is another episode of the RosinBaggers podcast brought to you by Backyard Sports. We've got Ty out in God's country with maybe the most magnificent backdrop we've had on the show. How you doing, bud?
Right. I'm doing well. I'm 45 minutes to the south of my regular home, which puts me in about 5G to 3G internet country. So we were having some internet issues with the laptop, and I just said, you know what? You guys got a beautiful backyard. You got a beautiful deck. I'm just going to go chill out and talk a little baseball.
Absolutely, buddy. And it's beautiful weather out there. I know you guys have had kind of a weird lingering winter / cold, wet spring, and I know it's been the same way up in New York. If my dad's tuning in, he just spent some time down here in Virginia where it's a little warmer, but looks like you got some nice weather today. So,
zero wind, absolutely Chamber of Commerce temperature outside. It is the rare 3-day stretch in Nebraska that we call springtime before it changes over to 100-degree summer. So we're gonna try to enjoy it, baby.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's dive right into it, man. Let's talk about some series we highlighted last week. I'm going to pass your way first, bud, and you were talking Dodgers-Cardinals?
Dodgers-Cardinals, and ended up
the Redbirds are red hot?
Ended up being a lot more Cardinals than Dodgers in the series, which I thought was a possibility. Now, again, I mentioned, last week that I'm like, all right, I'll be happy. A 2-2 split with LA, with the front runners, with Mookie, with Freddie. But that pitching staff, I mean, we'll talk more about the Dodgers in specifics coming up here on the show. But that pitching staff right now in shambles, and a rejuvenated St. Louis offense with Nolan Gorman is absolutely crushing it right now. One of the best young players in baseball. Hit something just shy under 500 in the entire week, and 4 of those games were against the LA Dodgers. And St. Louis, as much crap as I gave them in the midway point of our podcast season so far, which was the midway point of about April, and as much shit as I was giving Ollie and as much crap as I was giving the lack of effort there that was starting to take shape, they have seemingly all got on board all at the same time. Waino coming back helps, but the pitching staff has found their form. The bullpen is still a little shaky, and more on that in just a little bit, because you kind of posed the question to me last night in the group chat, and so I'll elaborate a little bit on that. But, Ryan Helsley is shutting the door for St. Louis, and as long as he continues to do so, keep trotting him out on the mound. But the interesting caveat with that is we know that closers can get overworked, and it's nice to have a setup guy or a secondary guy that you can call on to get 3 outs to get your team. And right now, that's a little shaky.
My concern on that front, and why I asked you the question last night, is he threw 31, I think it was, pitches on Monday, and then came back last night, and I think he threw 28 pitches if I'm not mistaken, or 26 pitches if I'm not mistaken, back-to-back nights. And as you just alluded to, sometimes you can kind of lean on a guy. And I know Helsley's a guy that's been proven, a proven commodity in the past, but I asked you the question, are they overworking him? Maybe, but as you said, right now, a team that struggled so hard out the gates, I think I'm with you 100%. You continue to give him the rock in the 8th and 9th inning as much as you can and ask him to be Hercules until you figure out who that next guy up is that you can get 3 to 5 outs late in the game that can really take the rock and shut a team down, because they don't have that.
I would say until you can find that guy or until he doesn't do it. Right now you called his number every time, and Helsley's answered the bell every time. And so there's no reason to go with the if it's not broke, don't fix it mentality. Would you like Giovanni Gallegos to kind of come into that role from St. Louis? Sure. Would you love that flamethrower Jordan Hicks? My God, goes 103, 104, 105 today. You would love for him to come in and be able to answer that bell. But along with 103, 104, 105 also comes wild pitch, and walks, and loading the bases and getting into jams. And Helsley is the kind of guy, and I don't know so much from the pitching perspective, never pitched, but I always heard this about pitchers, is there are some closers, and Helsley seems to fall right in line with those closers, that amplify their game with the more pressure situation that they put themselves in. And Helsley's the kind of guy that, like, shit, he loads the bases with nobody out, and then he, like, shrugs it off, and he goes and gets the next 3. And you're like, okay, that's cool. Like, you only gave me, like, no more hair up here at the top of my head.
Yeah.
But he's pitching well, and the offense has found their stride. Goldie came around, had a really good game against the Dodgers the other day. Nolan Arenado has seemingly found his swing after his early season struggles. And again, what I look at with St. Louis as they move forward, my biggest question marks aren't, are they going to catch the NL Central? It's when do they catch the NL Central? And it's how many games do they win the NL Central by? But it's also a big question mark right now, and you're going to see a lot of names that St. Louis is going to throw in the trade deadline talks. We don't have room. We don't have room for a Tyler O'Neill right now. Not with as hot as Burleson's been playing. Not with Jordan Walker sitting in Memphis continuing to rake and just waiting for his time to an opportunity to shine. And Nolan Gorman, a natural third baseman who has kind of shifted over and playing a little bit more second, but you got the sure-handed Tommy Edman there. So you're kind of flexing Edman and Nolan Gorman out in the outfield, and, they're doing really good work. But right now, St. Louis is still having that problem where I don't think the Dodgers are. What did we talk about with LA? And we'll talk more about it here in just a sec, but they're 1 through 9 okay, but there's no depth. There is no pieces. They're missing, whereas St. Louis is in the exact opposite scenario. And it's like, we have got depth for days and we can call up any guy. And now we're starting to see that come to fruition. And Ollie's having fun with this lineup. It's mixing and matching. It's going on matchups, and there's a lot of analytics involved. And again, what I told on social media the other day, and I'm not trying to be a St. Louis homer here, but y'all got a 13.5 game lead, and it's not even June, and St. Louis is right back in the mix of the National League Central. I can sit here right now outside in God's country, beautiful weather here in central Nebraska, and say it's not it's not when St. Louis catches the rest of the league. It's how many games they get by and pass the rest of the league on. This is a hot baseball team. St. Louis taking 3 of 4 from LA was a huge statement. Are they in trouble? Did the bullpen go to shit because they were up 6-1?
It's 10-3 right now with the Reds.
10-3 up?
Down, yeah.
Down. I must have misread my
Maybe.
my updates.
Maybe.
Well, that's a bummer.
Yeah. It's not baseball. We've talked about it.
It's not when they catch the rest of the NL Central. It's when the Reds decide that they're going to lay down and let us catch the rest of the NL Central. God damn it, Reds! Let me make my point.
Right.
Cincy.
Yeah, and I know that you and I talked a lot about kind of how management has assembled this bucket of talent, right? And how Ollie was, it seemed like, mismanaging. You can look really good and really competent as a manager when Goldschmidt hits, 4 dingers in a 5 at-bat sequence, and Arenado starts looking like Nolan Arenado of 2016 through 2022, And Nolan Gorman looks like the prospect that we thought he would be and is hitting 500 over his last, I think, 7 games. And, and then Contreras is starting to swing the bat a little bit, and you get a little bit of pitching from the starting rotation, and you can absorb some of the issues with the bullpen because you've got a lead. And then you got Helsley come in, and he kind of shuts the door late. I'm with you. I think the Cards are going to be buyers at the deadline, and I think it's going to be an arms race in the National League because the Braves need bullpen help. The Dodgers need pitching help from the rotation to the bullpen. They need depth. So it's going to be on them to kind of make a decision on where they're going to buy. And I'm not even mentioning any of the American League teams, right? Because there's going to be buyers over there at the deadline. I think we're looking at potentially maybe the most hotly contested arms race maybe at the deadline when it comes to those innings 5 through 8 guys that teams are going to float out there. And there might be a team in the catbird seat right now sitting, maybe it's the Reds or the Rockies or maybe the Nats or something along those lines, because the Nats have a couple of good arms in the bullpen that aren't in the plan for 5 years, right? So you might be looking at some of these teams at the bottom, maybe the A's, right? I hate to give the A's any credit, but teams like that are at the bottom of their division that might be looking out there and saying, holy shit, St. Louis has got a deep farm system. The Dodgers have a deep farm system. The Braves have a deep farm system. I've got some middle relief help. I might be able to get a good return on a bullpen arm that we don't see very often. I mentioned Andrew Miller a couple of weeks ago. He was kind of the last time we had a guy get traded that really had a decent return that delivered for a team that he moved to. Those bullpen arms don't always fetch a big price, but it might be this year that we look at several teams needing bullpen help that are right there saying we are World Series contenders that might drive the price up, right? They might drive the price to a point that somebody's got to give up a top 5, top 10 prospect in their farm system to get that guy because they think that's the guy that's going to get them maybe a World Series title this year.
But and a couple points on that. And first of all, on Oakland, can you imagine kind of a hybrid forced starter like James Caprillion? I think Caprillion would be a great middle relief guy. Because what's he do in Oakland? He is dominant in the first 3 innings, and then when that lineup comes back around, they've got him.
Yeah, that lineup turnover.
And his ERA infloats. But he is dominant in the first 3 innings of a start. If he could go 6 or 7 and just have to face a lineup once, if even that, I think he could be a great middle reliever. And here's the other thing to talk about St. Louis, especially when it comes to the arms race. St. Louis does not traditionally go with a lot of splashy arms, but look back at last year. They're sitting neck and neck in the race with the NL Central with Milwaukee. They go out in the deadline, and they got 2 moves that I was pretty critical of, to be honest with you. Jordan Montgomery, where they gave up Hay-Bay with Harrison Bader, and they got the pitcher for Pittsburgh, whose name is going to all of a sudden elude me. Not Contreras, but anyways, it's gone. They go out and they get 2 guys that provided really good 4 and 5 starting help. So St. Louis is not afraid to go after some arms. Fortunately for Montgomery this year, he's been a little up and down, probably more down than up. But he was the key last year in terms of closing out the regular season and getting St. Louis into the playoffs. Montgomery had a fantastic rejuvenated career, and that's what happens on a lot of these pitchers that we think, past their prime, you maybe don't have enough in the gas. They get into St. Louis, and it's like, holy shit, I still got this. I would not be surprised, but for St. Louis, in terms of their chase this season, I don't want to look at any offensive players. I don't want to look at any potential prospects. I don't want to look at big bats. I don't want to go after, I scratched that. I do want to go after Shohei, but but I don't want to go after the big splash free agents. I want us to solidify that bullpen. I want us to maybe get one more starter if need be. And if not, great. Throw him in the bullpen, make him a long reliever, but load up arms. When you say arms race, it's not about arms race of how you can weaponize a team and weaponize an offense. It's quite literally a right and left arms race, because everybody in the National League, the biggest question mark involving every front runner is what staff, what pitching rotation, and what pitching staff can hang in there the longest. And that is going to be ultimately, I think, the tail of the tape in the National League this year.
Yeah, one last thing I want to circle back on before we shift gears. With Jordan Hicks, you mentioned 103, 103, 105, and he can pump it up there in one at bat. But you never know where it's going, right? I always wondered why an organization doesn't go to a guy and say, listen, I don't want 100% on every pitch and not know where it's going. I want 90% and hit me a corner once in a while, right? Just find the black once in a while at 95, 98, right? Because you're talking about a guy that can really dial it up in triple digits, but has no clue where it's going. And that's a liability in the bullpen, especially. That's a guy I can't bring in a high-pressure situation. That's a guy I've got to bring in a clean inning, or else I'm just anticipating he's going to walk in a run, or he's going to throw a ball by the catcher that's going to end up, allowing somebody to score on a wild pitch. I just don't understand why organizations don't do more of this, understanding that velocity is great. Velocity is really great when you can harness it and put it somewhere where you're going to be able to get guys out. You look historically at the guys who threw hard, right? Randy Johnson struggled early in his career. Nolan Ryan struggled really bad with walks early in his career. And even during a lot of his no-hitters, he had 6-8 walks, and he was throwing 130, 140 pitches. Guys don't throw like that nowadays. And Hunter Green is an example now. He can dial it up, but he never really gets you deep in games because he can't fucking stop walking people.
Right.
Smoltzy was a guy that once he got to the point where he could paint a corner, and then the Braves were tremendous with doing this with developing pitchers, but Smoltz was unhittable at 94 to 96 with his fastball instead of 98 to 100 and not being able to paint anywhere. Just like guys should do more of that nowadays. Location and changing velocity will forever be the key to pitching. And I think we've lost track of that. I'll get off my soapbox, but I think we've lost track of that in today's game because you get these bullpen guys that just can't get outs because they're either going to throw it over the backstop or they're going to throw it right down the cock and a guy's going to hit it over the fucking fence.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, onward and upward.
You look back at Hunter Green. Have you ever seen a guy that throws 102 miles per hour, has all the velocity, has all the stuff, but by the fourth inning is already like 96 pitches? I mean, it's like, what the hell is going on?
He's going to be a closer. We've talked about this. He's going to be a closer.
And he should have been a long-time starter for Cincinnati had he been developed correctly, but you're going to have to limit him to one inning.
Yep.
Period.
Yep.
End of rant.
Yep. All right, so I've got the picture of Sandy here, but before I get to Sandy, I'm going to talk a little bit about San Francisco because I don't want to just blow by San Francisco. I highlighted this series because I thought it was two teams coming into this that were kind of right there in terms of within shouting distance of the wild card early. I know too early to talk wild card, but wild card spot, their division, they're kind of breathing right in that area. And I thought maybe this is a series that could create some momentum. And San Francisco did that, right? They take 2 of 3 in this series, and they won their first 2 games coming out of this series. The offense has been really good for them here in the last about 2 weeks. They're getting some quality pitching, but they continue to be able to push buttons. And I know Boch was there for a long time, kind of set the stage. They're doing a really good job of managing their bullpen arms. They get into tough situations, critical situations, and they're able to battle out of them. Miami had them on the ropes in a couple of games in this series. They ended up taking one, but I think it was game 1 where San Francisco ended up winning. They left a lot of guys on base because of the bullpen situation. So I want to highlight that San Francisco, and then they come out of that and they take the first 2 games Now I forget who they're playing right now, but I'm gonna double check it right now because I had it up. Minnesota. They took games 1 and 2. They just lost today, so they took 2 of 3 though. Won another series coming out of this series against Miami. That's a team that I think they're going to hang around, and I don't think I gave them a lot of credit. I don't think any of us really gave San Francisco a lot of credit this year coming into this season. This sort of harkens back for me to, I want to say it was 2018. It might even have been as early as 2017 when they won 106, I think it was, games. The year the Dodgers won 103 and had to play in the wild card. This team plays really good defense. They get timely hitting, and they've got some good pitching. I don't think that it's that level, but it feels the same way with this San Francisco team. This is a team that you shouldn't sleep on if they're on your schedule. So I wanted to highlight that before I jump over to Sandy Alcantara, because defending Cy Young, seemingly the best pitcher in baseball, and I don't know what's going on this year. He's had 2 really, really good Sandy-esque starts, and everything else has been either meh or bad. And his bad's been really bad, and he had another bad start against San Francisco. I believe it was in game 1 even in this series. It could have gotten uglier for Miami if they hadn't gotten some crucial outs with guys on base. San Francisco left quite a few on base in that game as well. But I don't know what's going on with Sandy, and I watched the highlights. I didn't get a chance to watch this game. I wanted to watch a couple of these games from the series, and I didn't have the opportunity to. But
sure,
I don't know what's going on with Sandy, because I did watch one of his starts earlier this year, and I got the feeling that he's pressing, and I don't know what he's pressing for. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's got a agent maybe in his ear talking about the horizon, because the horizon for him, I don't believe, is in Miami. He's going to be another one of those guys, Josh Beckett, AJ Burnett, et cetera, down the Dontrell Willis, on down the line of big-time pitchers who have a really good career in Miami but end up somewhere else fetching a bunch of prospects for Miami. I don't know if he's had an agent in his ear talking about the future in New York or the future in LA or the future in Boston or wherever that might be, the next step. But if that's the case and that's why he's pressing, that agent needs to shut the fuck up and just cash that check in 2024 when he becomes a free agent after the World Series. Just cash that check, because Sandy is Sandy, and this is not Sandy. I expect him to get back to more of what we've come to expect from him, but it doesn't look good through about a little over a third of the season, and I don't know where that goes, because I thought he'd be in Cy Young contention, but right now he's in like the doldrums.
But it could be an agent thing. What I also look at is, and I'll reflect it back to, at any level of baseball, how hard and how much of it is mental when you have a guy who's playing for a team that hasn't been great, that rarely gets you any run support whatsoever, and you've gone out there and you have locked in and dialed in, and as a pitcher, and again, I cannot speak on behalf of pitchers. I can't throw a splitter from a curveball to a changeup to save my life. I got no idea what the hell's going on up there, and I admire the fact that you all can. I have no idea what's going on in your head. I know what's going on in my head from the batter standpoint, but you have to stay. Whether you're a batter or a pitcher, you're locked in to those ABs. You're absolutely 100% mentally focused, and when you have a season like Sandy had last year, I can only imagine you leave it mentally drained and absolutely exhausted. And then you come back to a team that's scuffling out of the gates, that still is doing the same bullshit that they did a year ago when you were absolutely lights out. And that has to be mentally exhausting for him. And I'm sure that there's an agent playing a fact in, and I'm sure that he's trying to go for the super stats and the strikeouts and the low ERA. So not only can you be a pitcher on a winning baseball team, but you can also make Shohei, Trout, Tatis style money whilst doing it. And I know that that's probably only adding pressure to the situation. But I'm looking at less from the pressure standpoint because we saw him last year when he's in pressure situations, he came through and he pitched well. So I think it's less of that and more of literally being mentally exhausted of playing for a shit team in Miami. And I don't know how you reverse that. There's no approach really other than go out and have fun again and try to end this last 3 months, and it won't even be that. I'm sure he goes at the deadline. You mentioned the arms race. The Dodgers, for God's sakes, have enough money to land Sandy Alcantara tomorrow if they really want to. He's going to play for a winner, but he needs to get his ass in the right mentality and mind frame so that his mentality and mind frame doesn't affect his mechanics into the second half of the season.
Yeah, and that's a fair point, right? That has to be a drain. I was fortunate enough, in high school, I struggled a lot with that, but as a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, you're out there having fun and you're just fucking, fuck, we can't score any runs. But
right.
I was fortunate enough when I got to college that we had a lot of offensive run support. And as I mentioned, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, there were innings I would literally look down the bench and be like, hey, man, can you just take 3 so we can go back out there? I don't want to sit here and get cold on the fucking bench. Right? So I know kind of both sides of that, and I certainly can understand, especially as a professional, you've got to be so perfect all the time too, right? These hitters are so good. You make a mistake, they're gonna dunk it in the upper tank. So, I think you're spot on with some of that. I think it's a little bit of both, right? That he's looking ahead. Maybe the agent is talking to him about the deadline too. And I know Soto last year when he was with Washington felt like he was pressing.
Oh,
a bit too,
yeah. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe it is quite a bit of that as well. So either way, I just want to see Sandy get back to being Sandy, man.
Same here. But going back to the Giants just really quick.
Yep.
Because you mentioned Soto, and I'll bring this up. We're starting to kind of chat more a little bit about San Francisco. Are we chatting more about San Francisco and starting to establish them as a potential contender only because of the struggles and the slow start that San Diego has had? I still, in my mind, I don't put them in that category. I think San Diego ultimately can figure it out and catch. But the conversation is certainly worth having, and I'm thinking it's happening because of the horrible start that's happened in San Diego.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, right? I think San Francisco is just thought of as maybe the third team, and I think even to kind of double down on that, I think nationally there's still an expectation that Arizona is not going to be this team, right? And I know both you and I and we talked about how we thought Arizona had potential with that young roster and in the couple of moves that they made to really strengthen that roster with some veteran help that we thought they would be there. But I don't think nationally Arizona gets the respect they deserve.
Nope.
So I think it is, right? The AL West, everybody just kind of thinks of the two selfish teams in the league, right? The two fat and happy teams in the league in the division, Jesus. With LA and San Diego. Yeah, we got there. With LA and San Diego, though, because they've all gone out and made splash moves, get all the stars, bring them in. And it's we've talked about the arms race at the deadline, but it's been an arms race with those two. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right that San Francisco is not getting the credit in that division because I think there is this maybe hidden sentiment that San Diego's just going to end up being there at the end of the season. But it might get late early for them, man. Yeah. Honestly, because Arizona's 8 games over 500. The Dodgers, with all the holes that we've talked about them having, they're 10 games over 500. And in San Francisco right now, with winning 4 out of their last 6, they're sitting at just a game below 500. I believe it is, right? Yeah, 24 and 25. They're a game below 500, and all 3 of those top 3 teams have won at least 6 games. Arizona and San Francisco have won 7 out of their last 10. So San Diego can only scuffle for so long before we have to start saying, well, maybe it's a lost season for these guys. I don't know.
If you're going to start slow in the Central.
In a different division, yeah. Either the AL or NL Central, yeah. Not in the NL West. That's for damn sure.
Right.
All right. Well, let's talk about some upcoming series. So I'm going to talk, let's talk Dodgers. Let's talk Dodgers because you mentioned it a moment ago that we were going to hold off. Dodgers Rays. I picked this series. We're flip-flopped here, but I picked this series because it's 2 first-place teams. The Rays have cooled off a bit to a certain extent, especially a 20-1 fucking drubbing last night at the hands of the Blue Jays. But this is still 2 first-place teams, and this is 2 teams we expect to be in it late. I did want to talk a little bit about what I think you were alluding to with the Dodgers and Cardinals series from last week. This isn't the Dodgers team of 2020, 2021, and 2022, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked about it earlier this season, especially with the injury to Gavin Lux, that they're really hurting in the middle of the infield, but pitching-wise, they've really been struggling, and it is sort of a testament to how deep that lineup was entering the season and how savvy Clayton Kershaw is right now because he's had a great start to the season. They've gotten wins and they're 10 games above 500, and we're talking about them right now like they've got a lot of holes. So they're still 10 games over 500, but this is a team in the Rays, and this is why I wanted to highlight this series, that we might see this exposed much in the same way that we saw it exposed against the Cardinals, where the Cardinals really laid it on them offensively, especially. This could be a measuring stick for me to tell me just how aggressive the Dodgers are going to be at the deadline, because we know they're not in wait mode. They're not in 10 years from now mode. They're in win now. They want to win a bunch of World Series in this 5-year probably window that they've built. This could be a series if the Rays come in and take 2 of 3, or if they not come in because they're in Tampa, but if the Rays take this and take it to the Dodgers, this could be an indicator that at the deadline, and maybe even before the deadline, if the Dodgers really want to kind of jump the gun and get a leg up in terms of the moves near the deadline, this might be the series, because the Rays, they're not going anywhere. The Dodgers have aspirations for the World Series. If they struggle here, this might be an indication, because this might be a team they would see in the World Series if they make it to the World Series. We might see the Dodgers start to hit the panic button and say, okay, maybe we need to make a move in June as opposed to waiting to July, August when we get to that trade deadline, we get to the Midsummer Classic. It might be time early for them to kind of jump the gun and start to make those phone calls and lengthen the bullpen, maybe even lengthen the lineup. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the Dodgers in light of this series.
Well, and you mentioned it on the rotation, and sure, their rotation was great going in, but you lost a closer or at least a late relief guy with Blake Turan before the season started. Then you had the Dustin May injury. Now we understand that Julio Urias is also on or going to be going on the shelf, and this just in. They put a lot of stock into that 23-man roster on the MLB team, and I'm looking at your prospects and I'm looking at your minor league farm system, and I'm like, I'm not sure if any of these guys are ready to play Double-A, let alone in the major leagues, and that's an issue with the Dodgers. And again, and you alluded to it, I don't even think it's panic button. I think it's chess. And I think the entire the front runners of the National League are all playing this. Well, let's backtrack. Not the front runners in terms of the current standings. The perceived front runners in the National League. Your Mets, your Dodgers, your Cardinals, your Braves. a gigantic big game of chicken currently taking shape. Somebody's waiting for someone to make a move, and I think LA does ultimately, and I think they do before the deadline, because now they were banking on that 23-man roster to be good enough to get them to the deadline where they could assess the situation and evaluate. But that 23-man roster is now down to about 19 and a couple call-ups from AAA that weren't ready to play at this level. So I think if you're LA, you're making the first play, and you're going out and getting some. You're going out and getting some help. You go back and you look at Tampa, for instance, and my God, what a relief! And I say this with full sympathy to the fact that you got blown out by 19 runs. How good was it to see that Tampa Bay is human? It's like when you watch the PGA Tour and you see a professional golfer shank one, and you're like, holy shit, anybody can play this game. Like, it's not, you're not superhuman after all. You got skunked like everybody else has.
Yep.
Now, that being said, if you're LA, you got to look at that and you got to use that as motivation. You're like, look, they just gave up 20. It's not as if Tampa is this super team that is all elite and is going to be crowned the World Series champion. They just gave up 20. Yep. We have to take that. We have to use that. Now, obviously, every scenario is different, and once you get down by X number of runs, you're throwing out whomever, and you're saving your bullpen. And I understand that a lot of times those waterfalls only get worse because at some point you realize, well, let's pack this one in and stay your bullpen for another day. I understand that, but it's a human Tampa team, and if LA doesn't come in and see that scoreline and doesn't come into this series hungry, they didn't do their job to get motivated for what should be a really exciting series this weekend. That's going to be fun because you're talking about a team that we did not consider to be, we considered to be really good. We've all said Tampa is a really solid baseball program. We didn't have them as the AL crown. We crowned Los Angeles and Atlanta a little bit, both in that National League kind of coin flip over who was gonna make it out of that NLCS. If the Dodgers want to prove it, the Dodgers should prove it this weekend. And I hate to use the word playoff-esque or playoff caliber or playoff-like series. This has all the makings of a match that we'd be watching in October.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's absolutely a measuring stick series. And it's May, right? And I know it's late May, but it's still May.
Not even June.
This, right, as possibly a measuring stick series. So, for sure. All right, let's switch over to your series you wanted to highlight here. Brewers, Giants. Talk to me, bud.
Thought we would kind of continue our San Francisco Giant conversation, and thought I would do so in the fact that when we're talking about where they shape up in terms of the standings right now in the NL West, they have a very good opportunity to continue in a big-time series to pick up those wins that maybe, if we're looking in April, we're thinking this might be a Milwaukee sweep, or this might be a situation where San Francisco loses ground. And right now, from the Brewers' perspective, and I would hate to give them any advice, but you better look in your rearview mirror because, as mentioned at the top of the pod, other than the fact that St. Louis just dropped 2 unseemingly easy wins to Cincinnati, because baseball is baseball and it's always going to screw with us when we have an idea of what we want to talk about on this pod, and then 48 hours later after we make our selections, the baseball gods just say, nah, that's not how that's going to fly. Losing 2 to Cincinnati is really weird.
At least we know they're watching.
Right. But again, it hasn't been as if any of the teams in the NL Central have been able to take advantage. You look at the early season struggles, nobody got out in front. Nobody said, oh, you're a horse that just tripped out of the gate at the Preakness. We can take advantage of that and put on a couple lengths. No, they didn't. They stood there and they're like, are you gonna get in this race or not? Like, they just kind of slowly pedaled. It was wild to look at the way the standings have shaken up here. And I talked a little bit about Milwaukee a week ago when I mentioned just how slow this baseball team is. In terms, they have no speed on the base paths. They are not winning the stolen bases title anytime soon at all. And it's not even just the fact that it's Rowdy Tellez and some of the other guys on the squad. It's just, Christian Yelich has lost tremendous speed on the base paths and in the outfield. But this is a team, again, from Milwaukee's perspective, you got to be able to flex a little bit when you get a San Francisco to come in. But I really think, and especially taking a look at the pitching matchups, because I've always said Milwaukee has better pitching than St. Louis. Milwaukee has better pitching than the rest of the National League Central. But as I look at stat for stat on the line, when it comes to ERA and strikeouts and batters walked and whip ratio, San Francisco's neck and neck with them. San Francisco with a pitching staff similar to Baltimore a year ago, where you were kind of just hoping that fairy dust and pixie sticks got sprinkled on and made it work. San Francisco's been able to make it work in a hitter-friendly ballpark, mind you. This has all the makings of a series that San Francisco can not only win, but can sweep and continue to aid my St. Louis Cardinals in their quest to catch the Brewers. I'm really intrigued, and it wasn't so much as, let's take a look at series and how it affects the standings. It's like, okay, we covered the Cardinals last week. They got 3. Let's cover the Brewers this week and see if they can lose ground so St. Louis can catch. The National League Central in the early part of the season has been really fascinating to me based on how quickly St. Louis has been able to catch up. But that said, I still think that Milwaukee has this pitching staff that could honestly, if they flicked it on tomorrow and went lights out and went 5-0, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I wouldn't be shocked. It's extremely talented, but San Francisco's lineup is extremely consistent. There's not one guy that overshadows or steals the spotlight. But the biggest surprise for me for the San Francisco offense has been their power. Where did that come from? Yeah, hitter-friendly ballpark, sure, but they're mashing road games. They're mashing on the road. They hit more multi-home run games this season, as I'm just scanning the league, than any other team I've watched so far this year. And the power, to me, didn't jump off on the stat sheet. It didn't jump off as I was taking a look at this team on paper, but they found it. And kudos not only to the manager in San Francisco, but that entire coaching staff, because the hitting coach has clearly seen something and the players have bought on board. And here's the deal about that with the power with San Francisco. I was just explaining this the other day because we were talking about hurler on hurler, and we were watching the college Big Ten baseball tournament going on right now with Nebraska and Rutgers. And, some guy throws 100 miles per hour and the ball goes 450 feet. And he's like, man, how can you even catch that velocity? And I'm like, you can't. But when you do, it goes a long way. And here's the deal. With San Francisco's power at the plate and Milwaukee's power on the mound, advantage San Francisco, because if they get a hold of it, they're going to hit a lot of home runs this series. Flex me for San Francisco, not to sweep. I'll take him in 2 to be safe.
Yeah, and you mentioned the lineup. That's been the biggest surprise, I think, for me, maybe in all of Major League Baseball. Honestly.
Lamont Wade Jr., who are you?
My God.
I didn't know who this guy was, and now he's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's absurd. And I before the season, I had them probably in the bottom 5 in terms of lineup.
Yeah.
I didn't think they would score runs. I even wagered against them a few times early in the season and lost on that because they were facing good pitching and were beating up said good pitching. I didn't see that coming. And man, just an unbelievable turnaround, or at least I guess overachievement from San Francisco in terms of their ability to squish the ball. We've got a good question, Brett. I'm gonna jump into your question after we get to the most important segment of the show. We call it our Folds of Honor Salute to Service. All right. Every episode goes out to a fallen service member. This episode goes out to Army Sergeant First Class Antonio Rodriguez. He died February 8th, 2020, serving during Operation Freedom Sentinel. At the time of his passing, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez was 28, hailing out of Las Cruces, New Mexico. The incident appeared to be an insider attack in Nangarhar Province, Afghanistan. Sergeant Rodriguez was part of 3rd Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group out of Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. Army Sergeant First Class Antonio Rodriguez, we have the watch. All right. So this is a good question. So I'm going to bring this up so we can bring the energy up a little bit. Let's talk prospects. So my brother asks, there's a lot of young talent coming up or already in the big leagues. We talked about it last year, right? In terms of this wave of teams suddenly. The new CBA, I think, had a lot to do with it. My dad says salute. Yeah, absolutely. But this year we're looking at guys like Volpe, right? Made the opening day roster for the Yankees. Taj Bradley's been called up. Bryce Miller, Dela Cruz. Dela Cruz is a guy that I think there's huge aspirations within that Cincy organization. Jordan Walker had the huge hitting streak or on-base streak, I think it was, early in the season. Stone, yada, yada. Who's going to be critical in terms of these young guys down the stretch in your eyes?
Well, I think two come to mind, and that's Volpe and Jordan Walker, because it's two guys that I think that you're going to take a look at a team that is going to say, okay, we've got some extra baggage. We've got some loose weight. We're going to cut that at the deadline. We're not only going to get some extra prospects to add to our farm system, but we're probably going to be able to add another arm into our bullpen or in our starting rotation. And so we need you guys to step it up and be an everyday player. Here's the deal, and I'll say this about Jordan Walker with St. Louis because this is kind of an issue I've been following a lot lately. Jordan Walker did nothing wrong to go get back down to Memphis. He is simply, at this point, a byproduct of St. Louis having a surplus of outfielders. Where are we going to put you at this point? You're not even 21 years old yet. You can't even legally drink. Go out there, get yourself some extra time, get some minor league pitchers, get some confidence. We will call you back up. I truly feel from St. Louis's perspective that Tyler O'Neill will be ultimately a deadline trade bait, will go to somebody else at the trade deadline. I think Walker comes in and adds to that outfield. Burleson will go over to center, maybe even shade Tommy Edman a time or two. If Nolan Gorman wants to play second base, Edman can certainly go out and shade in center. So Jordan Walker, to me, is one that will play a critical role for St. Louis moving forward, because if you ship a guy like Tyler O'Neill off of that lineup, a guy that has speed, a guy that has power, you got to replace him with something really damn special, and I think Jordan Walker is that guy. The other thing with Volpe at that shortstop spot for the New York Yankees, we saw it a little bit earlier when we saw the offensive production with a guy like Aaron Judge. And when Aaron Judge was out of that lineup, my God, the Yankees were awful. They lost, 10 of 13 games. Aaron Judge gets immediately inserted into that lineup, and all of a sudden it's like, whew, okay, we're playing winning baseball again, thank God. Anthony Volpe is a guy that I think can and will step it up for New York, but they need help offensively. They cannot continue to rely on the power of Judge and the clutch hitting of Rizzo and maybe even an occasional manufactured run thanks to the speed of Harrison Bader. They need production, and I think Volpe kind of will ultimately play into the role of being a great 9 spot. And I say 9 spot, and everybody, when I say 9, everybody's like, "Oh, you really think he belongs at 9?" Well, hell yes, I do. 9th is a very strategic spot in the lineup for me that adds that secondary leadoff guy that can really either continue a rally that's going or start something fresh in the spot where you least expected it. And I think Volpe and Walker, to me, are the top two ready to excel this season in 2023 to make their teams make the postseason. And I think at the end of the day, and I'll be bold on it, Volpe will win the American League Rookie of the Year. Jordan Walker at the end of the year will get the call up and will make Rookie of the Year in the National League.
Nice. I like it. And I like the two choices you made. I'm actually going to go off the guided path that my brother provided us here. I'm going to talk a little bit about Volpe. I think that he is super important to that Yankees lineup. I also think defensively, he fills a position that they've been in between on, right? Since, of course, the captain retired. They've had some flashes here, flashes there, but never the guy that was homegrown, ready to really take over and be that guy, right? That everyday guy, and be a linchpin in the lineup. And I think the one thing that Volpe brings that, Jeter didn't is a bit of pop, right? Every once in a while you'd get some pop off of Derek Jeter's bat, and he was really good at going to the opposite field. But Volpe's a guy that brings that 400-foot home run power, right? And if you can get that from your everyday shortstop, or even if they move him a little bit in the infield, he's a guy that I think can make a difference in that lineup. But I'm going to go. So my brother mentioned Gavin Stone. I'm actually going to stay with that same team, but I'm going to go with another player. And we've talked about the need for the Dodgers to have reliable arms in the rotation, potentially reliable arms in the bullpen. Bobby Miller's a guy who came up, made a start against the Braves of all teams, and went 5 innings, 1 earned. You can't do much better in your fucking debut against that lineup. Holy shit, right? So I look at a guy like Bobby Miller, and if Gavin Stone kind of figures it out, because he's been rocky in his 2 starts, his ERA, I believe, is double digits in 2 starts. But I think Bobby Miller, Gavin Stone have the potential to provide the Dodgers with what they need so that they can be more aggressive in other areas at the deadline. If Bobby Miller can be the 4th guy in that rotation in the stretch months, August, September, October, or Gavin Stone, but I'm sticking with my pick with Bobby Miller here. If they can be the 4th guy in that rotation, it allows the Dodgers to really focus on bolstering that bullpen, but also, as we've already talked about, maybe it's Shohei to get a bat in the lineup, but I think they're looking at middle infield and really making a move there, because we've seen in the first time since he was in the minor leagues, and really since before he even became a professional, Mookie Betts played in the middle of the infield this year. And I don't think the Dodgers want that long term, right? Because he's one of the 2, 3 best defensive outfielders in all of baseball. So they really, I think at the deadline, are going to be pushing really, really hard to go find that guy in the middle of the infield that fills out that lineup, and then they can focus on the bullpen if one of these 2 young guys, and I'm going to stick with my pick, Bobby Miller, becomes that 4th reliable arm in that rotation, that allows the Dodgers to flex and start to focus in other areas. So in a way, I'm not asking a lot, right, from a young guy to be, as you put it, right, the Rookie of the Year, right, with Hicks and potentially, or not Hicks, but Walker and potentially Jordan in my head, but Walker and potentially Volpe winning Rookie of the Year. It's just, I think for the Dodgers, they're looking to lengthen that rotation potentially with one of these young guys, and if Bobby can do that, allows them to focus in other areas. My brother's gonna poke my fantasy bone real quick here.
Sure.
So we actually co-manage a team. He wanted to pick up Josh Lowe. We already had 3 Rays on our roster. roster. So I was like, I don't know that we need another Ray. Since the moment I fucking said that, the RosinBaggers curse has set in. He's been the hottest hitter in all of baseball. And he's hitting fucking left-hand pitching this year. Fucking what? A career platoon guy is now hitting fucking 320 against left-handed pitching? Fucking A. Anyway, I think Lowe is probably going to have some staying power this year. Maybe.
Probably. How have you not added him to your roster?
Somebody else
how
picked
has
him
he
up.
not been?
Somebody else picked him up after I said no.
No shit, Sherlock. Somebody else picked him up in the 8th round of our fantasy draft. The dude absolutely crushes. Oh, you passed on him. Oh, mercy.
He was in free agency too.
Of course he was. What was I saying? Rookies. You're going. Oh, you mentioned Bobby, right? Speaking of Bobby, here's and you mentioned the Dodgers with the middle infield. And I can see it. When does Bobby Witt Jr. become a Dodger?
Ooh, from blue to blue, huh?
I can totally see it.
From royal blue to Dodger blue?
Mm-hmm.
Boy, I'd hate to see it for Kansas City fans, but if
they're on a 7-year plan.
I know. If the Dodgers went and made that, especially this year, the haul that Kansas City would get, because you're talking about a guy under 2 more years of hard team control, and a guy that you're, in a year or two, you're going to be able to pay $150 million,
Yep.
Yeah, you're talking a big haul, man. I'd hate to see it. I've got a soft spot for small market teams. I want Kansas City to be good.
But I think they could get a Washington style U-Haul that goes back like when San Diego.
Yeah, just back up the Brinks truck of prospects.
They brought the entire farm system, and I think that would do Kansas City wonders because I don't think one guy is going to do it for you when you're on a 7-year plan.
They've got no pitching. That's what they would get back from the Dodgers. Because Brady Singer has still not become the guy, and you'd get back.
He's a guy, all right.
He is a guy.
He's an inconsistent guy. He's a wildly inconsistent guy. Yeah, you're right. It makes sense.
Yeah, and they'd get every one of those fucking highly rated A-ball pitchers from the Dodgers if they wanted to.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. I don't want to see it, but that's a good point.
I know.
Anyway, all right. And speaking of stocks, let's invest in some stocks. I'm laughing because I still haven't changed that intro to shorten it.
I'm not deaf because I muted it.
Oh, all right. I'm going to save mine for last here, buddy. So I'm going to pass your way. Talk to me about the Tigers. Talk to me about Javi Baez, who got sat down and might be the hottest player in baseball.
Tell you what. Here's what I'm excited about Detroit, and it's really for several reasons. I'm buying stock right now if I'm in Detroit, mainly, and we could pull up the graphic. I don't think we saved it or anything. Look at the win percentages in Major League Baseball right now. I have Detroit for one simple reason and one simple reason alone, and that is here's a ball club that's under 500 right now. That really, when you take a look at the rest of Major League Baseball, is a less than middle of the road team, and is sitting at last check like second in the American League Central. Maybe Minnesota might have jumped him at this point, or Cleveland's catching up. I don't really remember because it's that insignificant to me because it's god awful. And here's the deal:
Detroit's still in second place.
Yeah, they are still in second. Okay,
by win percentage, but. They're still in second place.
Somehow
they played fucking 3 less games than Cleveland and 5 less games than the White Sox. I know they had a couple of rainouts, so whatever. Anyway,
they did that too.
Still in second place.
Still hanging around in second. And when I look at Detroit, I look at a team that's like, okay, you're going to get a starter back. You're going to get Casey Mize eventually back. There it is. I liked it. Look at that. Look at how god awful that is.
They're 19 games out of last place
for an entire division. We talked, and here's the credit. Like last week on the pod, we touted and we celebrated the success that we were seeing in the American League East, and now we shift over to the American League Central, and I'm looking at a team like Detroit, who is, or at least I thought was, maybe on a 3 or possibly 4-year build, and next thing you know, it's like, well, you're sitting second in the division, in a division that really you could win right now by playing less than 500 ball. If you win one game for the rest of the season in a 3-game series, I honestly think you have a shot. The offense isn't bad. It's not as if this is some minor league offense like what we're seeing in Oakland, other than Brett Rooker. You got guys that are stepping up, that are getting some clutch hits, and they're hanging around in ball games, and their pitching staff has done just enough. And for the most part, their talent, all of Detroit's talent, is sitting on the shelf right now on the injured list. Once this team gets healthy, if they spark some positive momentum towards July, I could see this team closing strong. And when I say closing strong, again, please understand that I say closing strong with the understanding that I don't think you'll win maybe but a handful of series for the rest of the year, but I still think you're just as good, if not better, than any team that's in the Central right now. Yep. It is that bad. And the Baez saga has been wild. And sometimes, like you said, it takes a little kick in the ass to get it figured out. But what a resurgence. Wild stuff in Detroit, man. It's insane. And again, I'm buying stock, and I'm not buying stock because I think that Detroit has that ability to be this really great baseball team. I'm buying stock in Detroit because I think the rest of the division is garbage.
Yeah. Oh, what a bad division.
It's horrible.
All right. Well, I'm going to talk about a stock that has gone to the moon over the last 2 weeks. We talked about it.
Houston, prepare for takeoff.
Yep. How many more space cliches can we get in before the end of this segment? Because
lots, baby. I am a astrophysicist. I love it. Let's do it. Absolutely. Houston, holy shit, they are on fucking fire. Except the last 2 days, Texas has actually stretched the lead back out. So, of course, as I send in this as my pick, the curse takes full effect, and Texas stretches the lead back out. But I've got a little aside. I mentioned it in our group chat. Hello, boys. I'm back. And he was essentially on the moon or Mars or whatever, you know?
Yeah, one more space analogy in there. The aliens were invading Earth and blowing up the White House. But, man, Houston's been playing hot baseball. We talked about this division, right, when the Angels had the early lead, but then the Texas Rangers started making that comeback, and they kind of ran right past the Angels. Now, suddenly, you've got basically what feels like a 2-horse race, and the Angels are starting to get left behind here. You know, in terms of the standings in this division, you know, Houston has closed the gap. They had it down to a game just 2 days ago, except Texas won their last 2 and Houston lost their last 2. So, again, RosinBaggers curse in full effect. But this division became a 2-horse race at the top, with the Angels now maybe being that team on the outside looking in because of how great the AL East is. Are we back to potentially Shohei being on the block? Because we talked 2 weeks ago about maybe if they're still in the playoff race, he won't be, because the Rangers continue to play good baseball. You know, they're at 7-3 in their last 10, and Houston has just kind of steamrolled back into contention here in this division. And I don't know if anybody actually believed that Houston was going to be out. So if you were a savvy investor, you bought stock maybe 3 weeks ago, and suddenly you're cashing in on some short-term gains here as the RosinBaggers talk about the Houston Astros stock. Man, they're playing good baseball. They're getting healthy. Altuve is expected to be back, I think, this week, I believe. But they're getting healthy. The pitching looks better. Framber Valdez has maybe established himself as maybe the ace of this staff, maybe not an ace in the grander picture of Major League Baseball, but the ace of this staff. They don't seem to have felt the effects of losing Verlander as much as I thought maybe 3 weeks ago they did. Maybe it just took a little bit of kind of feeling things out and getting themselves squared away. The health, I think, has been the biggest thing for them. They were nicked up quite a bit early in the season. Even I think Jordan was still dealing with some of the effects of that wrist, like his hot hitting at the end of last year. I just think that he's still really ironing out that swing. He hasn't been as hot as I expected him to be, despite the fact he's still one of the best hitters in baseball. Houston's on their way.
Yeah. You go back to their pitching, and you're starting to see where they're figuring some stuff out. To me, when I was watching spring training baseball and even in the early portion of April, to me, the Houston pitching staff looked to be the most uncomfortable with the pitch clock rule changing. It looked as if their mechanics, their entire delivery, their setup on the mound, their routine, everything was out of whack. And I never felt like that entire rotation, especially after Verlander leaves, I didn't think that they were comfortable in their set. And certainly from a comfortability standpoint, they didn't appear to be confident in their stuff. And when you don't have your routine, whether it's going to the free throw line with the game on the line, or whether it's going to the bump with the ball in your hand, or whether it's being on the 2-yard line, if you're not comfortable in your routine, if you're not confident in your routine, you're going to get your ass kicked. And that happened to Houston early on. And I think now you're starting to see them a lot more comfortable with that pitch clock, as is, lo and behold, all of a sudden, all of Major League going to be a big issue all year, right? With the pitch clock, and there was going to be games that would be ended because of a pitch clock violation. Bullshit. They're figuring it out. They're grown ass men that know how to get the ball and throw. And I think Houston is really starting to take advantage of that and realize their roots and their mechanics, and they're starting to find a rhythm. And if this is a team that's going to find a rhythm, they're going to be scary in the American League West. I don't think LA sells yet, because why would you? Even though you might not get the West, I still think the Angels have a very legitimate shot to make a wild card bid, even as good as a start the American League East has had. I could see two of those teams falling off pretty easy in the AL East, and Anaheim taking advantage of one of those wild card spots. I don't want Anaheim to sell, because that fan base should see Shohei and Trout together in the postseason.
Oh, man, I'd love to see that for sure. God.
But yes, buy stock in Houston.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Hey, if we get 3 out of the West, and that means the Angels get in, man, I just want to see those superstars in the playoffs. Maybe they don't win a series because they still don't fucking have any pitching, but I just want to see those guys in the playoffs. Man. All right, bud. What do you got for us for closing thoughts here?
I'll give us some closing thoughts. We've done RosinBaggers now for almost a season and a half of baseball. And in that season and a half of baseball, we have never once, not at any point, ever even thought of breathing a word of praise for the Cincinnati Reds organization after what that organization did a season and a half ago, right before the regular season was supposed to start. A fire sale of a franchise for no other reason than to throw millions and millions and millions of dollars in your bank account, and you had the audacity to say, what the hell else are you going to do to that proud fucking franchise? And we have bagged on them, and we have eviscerated them, and we have belittled them ever since. And honestly, rightfully so, until this week, where the Cincinnati Reds were hosting the St. Louis Cardinals, and the St. Louis Cardinals, who have not had the greatest of years in terms of members of that Cardinals family that have been lost. And it hasn't been the players and the coaches, and it has been more directly affecting in my line of work the media guys, the radio broadcasters, the Mike Shannons, the Post-Dispatch writers. It has been a trying year in St. Louis for a long time, long voices of guys that have covered this beautiful game and have meant so much to the city of St. Louis. And this past week, Cincinnati, in the press box, has reservations for two of those great media faces and media writers that told the story of baseball with their words, who painted pictures that you couldn't see back in the day of glory radio and newspaper. And they reserved those spots in the press box with a rose to an organization that has done so much to harm the game. They showed humanity, and to that, they earned my ultimate respect.